All right. Hey there, everybody. Thanks so much for joining today. I'm really excited to do this interview today. Recently, I was at FinCon in Orlando and I met Clifton Corbin. And he had announced in front of a room of first timers at FinCon that he had released a book called Your Kids, Their Money. And I was immediately intrigued. So I thought, okay, we're going to have to talk. And I got a copy of the book and just devoured it. It is so, so good. So I want to welcome you today, Clifton. Thanks so much for being with me. And can you give us a little bit more about you and what led you to writing this book?
Sure, Terry. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. So yeah, my story, it's similar to many and different in some ways too. So when I was young, I was a money curious kid. Like I couldn't learn enough about money. Had all the early jobs, the lemonade stand, the paper route. So really keen to like earn money and find out more about money. And I was very lucky. I had two parents who were willing to talk to me about money. So, if I ever asked them like, how much money do you make? Instead of just being like, well, I'll tell you how much, they would show me their pay stub. So I was very fortunate to have parents who were willing to talk to me about money. But then I went off to university, and like so many young adults, I got those early credit cards, didn't know what I was doing, maxed them out, got another one, maxed that one out, didn't pay the bills, dove deep into debt. Again, it's a story we hear way too often. But after I was able to dig myself out of debt, I looked back and I was like, well, how did this happen? How did someone who was so curious about money, who was so willing to learn about money, and had parents who were willing to talk to them about money, how did I come to find myself in this mess? And I realized it was because while I was interested and I wanted to learn about money, and I had parents who were willing to talk to me about money, I only knew so much. Like my parents and I talked about earning, we talked a bit about saving, but we didn't talk about credit cards. We didn't talk about debt. We didn't talk about investing. We didn't talk about wealth. We didn't talk about insurance and protecting assets. Like all of the other pieces of the financial literacy puzzle were not spoken about. We just either they didn't have the language or they just didn't know I was interested, or for whatever reason, it just never came up. So I found myself, it was a gap that I had as a young adult. So once I dug myself out of debt and got myself onto, sure footing, I went back and I was like, well, how do I help other generations avoid some of these mistakes that I made? And I realized the time to help other generations is when they're at home, when they're young. So I've been working to find and put together resources to help parents and help kids, which is the reason I wrote the book.
Mhm.
It's to give parents the rest of the puzzle. So if you're a parent and you want to help your child get a better picture of how to manage their money, this is the resource that I created for you. So that's the genesis of the book.
Yeah, I love it. And one of the things that I loved so much about it, because it is, right? It's a resource for parents to know how to talk to their kids about money. And I found that when I was reading it, right away, you talked about the idea of, I started an allowance for my son when he was 4, and then kind of quickly scrapped that idea, right? Because he wasn't in the right place for that. And so you just shifted gears and you started working on, just kind of talking about money, generally speaking, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that's really important for a lot of parents because I think sometimes we can start something like I think of like chore charts, right? I think a lot of times parents will start the chore chart with the stickers and then the kid doesn't do the chores or the parents feel like I'm doing the chores and so they abandon it, right? But really what you're saying is just like give yourself permission to shift gears and make it appropriate for your child where your child is at too, right? So,
Exactly.
yeah, I do think I would just ask too, like, what would you say for parents who are really just kind of unsure, like, what should I even talk about? Because, like you said, your parents were willing to talk about some things, but not all things. So, yeah, what's your advice for parents who feel like, yeah, I should be talking to my kids about money, but I'm really not sure what to say?
Sure. So you mentioned how, like, when I started with my son when he was really young. We always kind of talked about money, but when I tried to introduce that allowance, it didn't work. He just wasn't ready for it. So I think it's important to go to where your child is, right? Like you have to meet them where they are. So it's important to really figure out what they're interested in and then find a way to make that relatable with regards to money and how they can talk about money. For example, if your child is into Pokemon, like one of the things I've talked about is, especially with Pokemon, it's so great because you can easily get into like a supply demand discussion with that one. Like if there's only so many of this card, then the demand is going to go up, and that means the price will go up. So there's so many different ways that you can take the conversation to where they are. But the critical part is that you're giving them what they need. So don't just answer the question, try to take that question to the next level. It's important that, like I said, like I talked about earning with my parents, but we only talked about one way of earning, which is trading time for money. We didn't talk about all the other ways that you can acquire money. Like you can acquire money through debt, which is one thing that I didn't understand, but there's also investing. There's also other ways to earn an income that isn't synchronous, trading time for money. So it's important to like hear their inquiries, hear their questions, and then try to take the conversation, push the conversation a little bit further. And I think by doing that on a consistent basis, you'll be able to capture the other pieces of the puzzle that I talk about. So it's making sure that you don't just answer the question, it's having a discussion. If you're discussing money, if you're actually making it part of your daily discussions or your daily life, then you'll be able to capture the other pieces and they will learn more from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you touched on about that, about making it a daily discussion, because I know that that was one of the key points that I read in the book, and I thought, yes, this hits home because it's what I really like to talk about with my clients as well too. Is this doesn't need to be a let's sit down at dinner tonight and have this talk, right? It's like we need to make it more organic and just really let that conversation flow. And I know that I've heard you talk. I think it was actually on another interview that I heard where you were talking about letting your kids see you pay bills, right? Because now we don't get a paper bill in the mail where we fill out a check and send it. It's not the same experience. So just helping kids to understand, like on a day-to-day basis, how money flows in and out of our lives is such a much more organic experience. But yes, deepening that conversation too, right? So that it's not, they observe things and we may or may not know how they observe things, but just making sure that we ask questions to say like, hey, did you see that? Like the price of those things went up, right? Like, and here's why that might happen. That's all really good. I have so many things I want to ask about, but one of the things that I really, really loved about the book, this felt so relatable to me because I feel like I do things unconventionally as a parent. I think sometimes I'm a little bit more on like the restrictive kind of a parent than the permissive type of parent. And so when I read that you were encouraging like loaning money to your kids and having them pay that back, I was like, yes, I'm not the only one, because I have done that before, right? I've number one, I made my kids pay bills when they turn 16. I make them pay their own car insurance, and also they have to pay for their own gas as well. I don't buy my kids their cars. I did a match savings for them, like if they were working and saving towards their car, I would match their savings. But yeah, I think that having your kids borrow money from you and then having to pay it back is a seriously valuable lesson too. It goes outside the spend, save, give jars,
Exactly.
right? Yeah, so I'm wondering too about another thing that I think is a little bit unconventional, is especially when kids are young and we do just have them kind of divvying up their money between the spend, save, give, is helping them understand sort of that delayed gratification for saving in the future too. So yeah, I would love any of your thoughts about number one, like loaning to your kids, but also helping your kids understand bigger concepts like saving for longer term too.
Sure. So for the first one, the reason I encourage you lending money to your kids. So I gave you my story about how I got off to university, ran myself into debt, and et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I realized after the fact is like I got off to university, was in college, had two credit cards, had student loans, and I'd never paid a bill in my life. I'd never owed anyone anything in my life. I never built the habit or even had an opportunity to pay someone back. So that's the reason why I encourage parents to loan money to their kids with the expectation that they're going to pay it back. Because what I'm trying to do, and it's one of the things I give many different tips of doing this in different realms throughout the book, but I'm trying to encourage children to build the habits that they will need once they're out of the home. Like I'm
Mhm.
trying to give you opportunities to give your child practice with financial habits once they're out of the home. With regards to the second part of your question, with the delayed gratification, it's challenging, especially for young kids to think about saving. Like there's sometimes it's easier if you have, let's say, a bigger ticket item and they're saving for that thing. And again, using the 3 jar method, if that's what's working for you, it can be easy because you have a target in mind. But the challenge is for them to save up for that big thing, but not drain their savings buying it, which almost sounds counterfactual, right? Like if they're saving for this big thing, of course they're going to use their savings to buy it. But if they drain their savings, again, that's not a good money habit. It's not the habit that we're trying to encourage adults to have, right? We're saying
Right.
save,
Yeah.
build that wealth, build that emergency fund, and then start, investing and using that extra money for that. So one of the things I've been speaking about recently is talking about an opportunity fund. So instead of talking about, you're saving for this big ticket item, you need to keep money left over for opportunities because kids aren't going to be saving for retirement. Like I'm talking younger kids here.
Right.
That just doesn't fix. You could work with retirement and some of those bigger, grander things in the later teen years or early adulthood. But for younger kids, you want to say, listen, if you spend all your money on this thing, and then your friends come and say, hey, do you want to come to the movies with us? Do you want to go to this amusement park with us, et cetera, et cetera? You want to be able to say, I have the money to go and do this. But if you've used all of your money, then you're going to miss out on that opportunity. So
Yes.
I've been trying to frame it as an opportunity fund. So save up for those big ticket items. Yes, that's great. That's good delayed gratification. But don't drain your savings. Also save for these opportunities because that's the habit. It's saving is just part of good money management. So we need that to, again, it's a practice that you can start young by using this opportunity fund as the method.
Yeah, I like that, the opportunity fund. And I feel like that's something that with a lot of my clients we're working on, having savings buckets, right? If you're
Mhm.
saving for a thing or saving, of course, for retirement and things like that too, that's also different than when you're just like putting money aside because you're going to need a big chunk of change for this, right? Holidays or back to school shopping, that kind of stuff too. So yeah, that's really great to help instill that with kids as well. Because I know that I myself kind of fell into that. Even in my early 20s when I was, starting in careers that were, offering benefits and retirement savings and all that too. That just like it all just felt like so
Doesn't make
long and
sense.
far away for me,
No.
even that I didn't take it seriously either, which is, a really big downfall when you suddenly look up in your mid 30s, early 40s, and it's just kind of like, ooh, I really haven't been saving for
Yeah,
retirement the way I should be, right? So I think that saving for the long term is a tough one to teach kids, but I do think it's valuable as well.
I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about some soft skills around money, right? Because I think a lot of us who are really interested in the financial space, it's a lot of really tactical, organizational, like hard skills around
Mhm.
money, money management, looking at numbers and playing with interest rates and those kind of things too. But talking about some of the messages that you can send to your children, either really overtly, like you can say very specific things, or just yeah, the underlying notion that a lot of times kids will pick up. So one of the things that you talked about in the book was addressing the like we can't afford it, and instead of saying we can't afford it, kind of reframing that as I'm not prioritizing that right now, or we're not prioritizing that because we have to use our money for these other things too. And I feel like the we can't afford it can also be something that deeply seeds in children, like so that long into their adult life, they start to have thoughts that they haven't even uncovered yet as to why and where those come from, but it can be messages like we can't afford it, right? So you do have some chapters in the end of the book where you're kind of talking about soft skills around money and just like how you talk to your kids about it. Yeah, do you have any particular tips that you would like to say as far as how to teach your kids, ways to really understand like the fluidity of money in their life and just like how to think about it?
Sure. So the two things I would want to bring up is as caregivers, we need to be very intentional with how we speak about money. So you use the example of we can't afford it. If a child were to hear something like we can't afford it, and then they go and see you spending money on yourself or spending money on the household or what have you, it sends a very mixed message. And, children are great observers, but very poor interpreters. So, it's really hard for you to then say, well, what does this mean? Like, what does it mean if you say we can't afford it? So I'm really encouraging caregivers to be very intentional with the way they speak about it. So use my definition, my rephrasing there to say, it's a priority. This isn't a priority in our budget at this time. You have to, the timing of that, obviously, if you're at the checkout line, you probably won't be able to have that conversation. But it's the rephrasing and being very explicit and very intentional about how we speak about money. The other thing that I've been really trying to encourage parents to have, especially when we're talking about, giving children allowances and giving them access to money, and we all know how consumeristic our society is. Like, we're all about getting more, having more, seeing more. I want us to start thinking more about, like, what do we have as opposed to what we want. So I do talk a lot about a lot in the book about, having a gratitude practice and being appreciative of the things that you have. I find that's one good way to hedge against some of that I want more, I need more. And it's those types of things that, like you're saying, these things that happen in our children's early lives can seed their behaviors later on. Some people call it like their money stories or their money scripts. It's these things that kind of get ingrained at an early age that really it translates into the actions of how they behave with money later on. So again, going back to the I can't afford it, or we can't afford it, that could then lead into a feeling of scarcity and acting on a sense of scarcity. And that could happen with regards to just money. It could happen with careers. It can happen with relationships. So it's really being intentional. I say all that, and I want to put the caveat, like, I'm a parent. You're not going to do everything right all the time. And the expectation should never be that you're going to do it all right all the time. Like, we're all just doing the best we can with what we have. And I need that to be very explicit as well, because the last thing I want to do is make any parent ever feel like they're not doing enough, because all parents are doing everything they can. They always have the best interest of their child at heart. So what I'm trying to do is just give you some extra tools and maybe, refine some of the things that you're doing to do it a little bit better. But I want to make sure that the intent here isn't to say you're doing things wrong, you need to do it better. It's, here are some ways that you might be able to improve. That's all. But yeah, it's really critical that we think clearly and intentionally when we speak to our children, because we want them to have, we're trying to set them up for success. So being intentional is one way to set them up for success.
Yeah, totally. And I also love not only the intentionality, but that you also kind of hit on like the gratitude practice. And I often say, just like, look at the things that really make you happy, right? And I think another interesting exercise for folks is that when you look back on your own childhood, what were some of your happiest moments? And then correlating to how many of those like really related to like big ticket items, right?
Yeah,
were you only happy on the big vacation to Disney World, or were you happy in like other moments where you just went out and made a snowman, like things like that? It's all about just like the values and what makes you happy. Yes, gratitude and the intentionality behind it all. It's so good. And I think I alluded to this just lightly before, but I just want to make sure that everybody like really hears this. I absolutely love, I'm a doer, I'm an organizer, I'm a chronological type person. So I love that at the end of all your chapters, you've got key takeaways and action items. And yeah, it is that we're all just doing the best we can with the tools that we've got. And if something isn't working for you, doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just might not be the right approach or not right now, right? Exactly. So I think that these are all just, they're such great suggestions, and I just really loved all of it. I ate this book up. I can't get enough of it. I can't say enough good things about it. Do you have other books that you might be working on? Anything else in the future that we might know about?
I have a super exciting project I'm working on right now. So I'm sure, as someone in this space, you're familiar with The Richest Man in Babylon. It's almost considered a, I won't say Bible, but it's like an entry-level book for personal finance. Like, almost anyone in this world knows that book. And because I love it so much, I tried reading it to my son. He's 10. It just didn't hit. Similar to the similar to the allowance at age 4, it wasn't working. But the reason it wasn't working is because the book was written quite a long time ago. So much so that the copyright ran out, and I realized I had the opportunity to rewrite it. So with my son, he and I have rewritten The Richest Man in Babylon to be plain language. I've used him as my sounding board so I can make sure it's age appropriate even for a 10-year-old to understand the concepts, which is so great. I've tried to make it very inclusive. I've tried to make it very modern. Same messages, similar stories, if not the exact same stories, but the language is a lot easier to absorb. And I'm hoping to release that in the next month or two. So I'm super excited about that. So that's one of the next big projects that I'm trying to get done in the next little while.
That sounds really exciting. I'm anxious about that one too. Knowing how good this work was, I can't wait to see what you do with that. That is fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today to talk about the book. And if people love what they've heard and they want to learn more about you or where to get the book, where can we send them?
So if you're looking for more about me, you can go to my website, cliftoncorbin.com. On there, you'll find some free worksheets. There's a blog there with other resources. If you're looking for the book, you can find it on Audible. You can find it on Amazon. There's a Kindle version. Barnes& Noble has it. So you can pretty much find it anywhere books are found. And yeah, so it's all over the place.
All right, wonderful. We'll definitely make sure to link to all of those. And again, thank you so much for coming on today to talk with me about the book. And I wish you the best with the next book too. I'm sure it'll be a great success.
And
So thank you
Carrie,
so much.
before I let you go, I just wanted to thank you for what you're doing. It's not easy to create a platform to help people. I know how much work it takes. I know how much of it of yourself you have to give. So I wanted to make sure I thanked you for what you're doing. It's such a service. Thank you for having me on, but more importantly, thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that. All right. Thank you so much. Take care and have a great day.
You too. You take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye now.